Is Monday, July 7th. This is Chris Payton, and I'm here with Joyce Pelphrey, and we're checking to see if the tape deck is working before we go ahead and start doing this. Okay, I think we're back live again. As I mentioned to you, the first question that we're asking people is how you, the person that we're talking to, is related to Johnny Mercer. So could you explain that to me?
Okay. My mother is Deborah Hall Berner, and she was Deborah Meltzer, and she was Ginger's younger sister.
Okay.
And Claire is her older sister. So Johnny was my uncle by marriage.
And what was the age spread on the three, Ginger and her two sisters? Do you know?
There's 5 years between the youngest and the oldest, and Ginger's right in the middle.
Okay.
So like, yeah.
Okay.
I guess that says it.
That does it. Where did they grow up? Who were their parents? And where were their parents located?
They grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I'll probably refer to their mother, my grandmother, as Nana. Everybody called her Nana, as long as I can remember. Her husband died when my mother was 5, so Ginger would have been about 7. And she raised the 3 girls on her own.
Mm-hmm.
And with, she was left with pretty much nothing. And she started a business making sewing, but she became known for children's clothes. She did very exclusive, elegant children's clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how she raised her 3 daughters. She wound up with 2 or 3 people working for her, sewing, doing the sewing.
Neat. So she was a business lady.
And so she was an early businesswoman.
Neat.
And raised her 3 children that way. I think she was 25 when her husband died. Or maybe not, maybe older, let's see. Yeah, I think she might have been 25 when he died.
And her name was?
She might have been a little older than that. Maybe she was 25 when she had all 3 of her children, then he died. Maybe she was 30.
Mm-hmm. Still young, though.
Yeah, her name was Anne, or Anna. And her husband's name was Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
And they came here from Russia. Nana came here when her husband came over first with his family.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the great stories in the family is about how Nana came to America.
Mm-hmm.
She was 18, and she walked across Europe from Russia to England, mostly walking.
Mm.
And she didn't have much money. Her mother made her a great big bag of sugar cookies, and she had what would be equal to like a nickel a day for milk, and a quarter that she had to save to send a telegram when she got to Le Havre to tell them when her boat was going to be arriving.
Mm.
And she used to tell all these wonderful stories about when she walked across Europe. She said, "I may never be back, and I want to see it before I go." And that was the attitude she had till the day she died. She always loved to travel. She always wanted to learn and see and go everywhere and do everything.
She sounds like a remarkable woman.
She really was.
Neat. We've been told that Mrs. Mercer had piano lessons, and that I understood
Yes.
from her that the plan was for her to be a concert pianist.
That's
that
right.
was where they were going.
That's right.
Do you know anything about how that came to be? I mean,
That's what I guess Nana's plan for her was, but it didn't. She wound up going on the stage when she was 16 instead.
Well, did either of the other 2 sisters get trained in piano?
No.
Or any of this? Just Ginger?
Ginger. And I was always told that she was very good and that she could have been a concert pianist.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't play much. Once in a while I could get her to play a little bit, but she never did play the piano very much.
We didn't know
Yeah.
about it at all. I asked her one day, what were you doing, before you met
Mhm.
Johnny? And she looked at me kind of thoughtful, and she said, oh, well, I was going to play piano,
Yeah.
Did either of the other two sisters dance or do any of the other theatrical things?
Mother danced, but she got married at 18, and so she never had a career.
Mm-hmm. And the third sister didn't do
And
any of this?
no.
then?
Claire didn't do anything like that I know of.
Were there other people in the family who were theatrical? I mean, was there a reason that this occurred to them to do it all? Or
I don't believe so.
just
None that I've ever heard of.
okay. Are there other relatives in the circle that would be significant? I mean, there were Ginger and her two sisters, the mother and father. Having emigrated, I would guess there would be a whole.
There was some sort of break with their father's family,
Mm-hmm.
and that when I've heard little bits and pieces of it and put a lot of it together, but I believe that he actually committed suicide, the husband,
Okay, Joseph.
Joseph. I didn't know that for years. It was well, he had a heart attack, and we're not sure. They think he had a heart attack, but my mother says he committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that they lived in a home, like a multi-family home, with his mother and maybe some other relatives, sisters or something. And the story I heard was that they cheated my grandmother out of everything, and she was left with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big rift in the family then. I didn't meet any of that side of the family until until like 1970 or something.
Really?
And then my mother moved, after my father died, my mother moved back to New York, and then she remarried and moved up to Greenwich, Connecticut. And there was I guess it was his sister, the grandfather's sister, that lived in White Plains, New York, and Mother got friendly with her. And there were a few members of the family that Mother had been kind of friendly with before. One cousin that I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And I, really did. When she moved back to New York, and she sort of made contact with some of the relatives from that side of the family, and I met them for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And the rift took place in
So-
the 30s, perhaps? That far back, do you think?
Oh yeah, before that.
Okay, 20s then.
20s.
Okay.
When he died, when my grandfather died, or when, it's hard to even think of him as my grandfather because he was dead when my mother was 5.
Right.
But that's when the rift took place, and there was a house that they owned together, and they were cheated out of it, so that my grandmother was left with nothing and three daughters to raise.
So she moved then? You probably don't know the details.
I don't know the details, but she had worked since she was 8 years old in a sewing shop. She used to tell stories about when she was in Russia, and she was 8 years old, and she worked in a ribbon shop.
Mm-hmm.
And so she always knew how to sew, and so that was what she did
Mm-hmm.
to make a living, and gradually worked into this business.
Good business to have, I guess.
Yeah.
You said that Ginger went on the stage when she was 16. What can you tell me about that? The show or what
Nothing
she did?
much, really. It was, she was in Good News. I don't know if that was the first show,
Mhm.
or I think maybe Good News was the first show. She was in a chorus, and they lived in Brooklyn, and Claire, who was the oldest, would go in and meet her after the show, and to go home with her. So
Late at night.
Late at
when it
night.
was all over.
Yeah. And that's about the only thing I know about that. And, I heard some stories from her and all about when she was in the shows with Bing Crosby and Dixie and Dolores Hope, and they were all friends from way back then.
Do you remember any of the stories that she told? Enough of it to tell
No,
again?
I really don't.
Okay. We understand that she dated Bing Crosby. Do you
Yes,
have
the
anything?
story in the family was she dated him and he wanted to marry her, and they were, when she met Johnny, she was going with Bing.
That's what somebody else had told us too.
I don't know whether it reached an engagement part or not, but it was pretty
serious.
serious evidently.
That's a nice family story to have in your background. Not too many of us have a relative, an aunt or
And
somebody.
of course, she and Dixie were best friends and stayed best friends till Dixie died.
Really?
I've been to the house with them and, to her place in California.
How did the family react when she decided to marry Johnny? Do you know? I mean, here's this boy from the South and family from Brooklyn, and clearly some cultural differences here.
Well, my mother had just done the same thing not long before. My mother married a man from Jacksonville, Florida, and moved to Florida. And I don't know, my family's very accepting and warm-hearted, and I suppose that when Ginger married him, then he just became part of the family. And he had nothing at that time. Ginger was more successful than he was. And they moved in with my grandmother.
Oh, they did?
And lived with her for, I believe, several years, or for some time until Johnny had his first successes in the 30s. And when he did become successful, he told my grandmother she was never going to work again. And he supported her the rest of her life.
How wonderful. That's neat. We
So-
didn't know that before.
Yeah.
We had wondered, all we have are telegrams and bits of letters, and we generally only have the ones that he sent to Ginger, not the ones that she sent to him.
Mhm.
And clearly there was some moving around, and we've been trying to piece together from the addresses that these were sent to, what was going on, and we just never could figure out exactly where they stayed or who they were with,
Well,
and how they made it.
Yeah, he was very appreciative because, Ginger married him, and they moved in with Nana. And I don't know how long they lived with her, and my mother wouldn't know the answers to a lot of those things. But when he had his first hits, like Lazy Bones, and started making some money, he started sending Nana a monthly check. It wasn't a whole lot, but he said, I don't want you to have to struggle and work anymore. And Nana loved to travel, and every so often he would send her a check for a couple of $1,000 and say, take a trip.
Really?
He was very,
Wonderful.
very generous with everybody, especially with Nana and with family.
Once the Mercers moved to Hollywood and got established and everybody started having children and all that, how did the families, you've got Ginger's family mostly on the East Coast, and you've got Ginger and Johnny on the West Coast. Did they see each other across the continent?
Oh, yeah, we
in
were
various
always very
places?
close. Of course, my mother and my father were living in Jacksonville, Florida, and Nana and Claire lived in New York, and Ginger and Johnny lived in California. So we would go to New York once or twice a year, and sometimes we would see Ginger and Johnny there. And then Johnny would go to Savannah to visit his mother and father, or his mother, and his father. I remember when his father died, and that's another story. Anyway, so a lot of times we would go to Savannah when they were there, or they would come on down to Jacksonville. And it would be fun whenever Johnny would come. He was always very generous with his time and his talent, and all the neighbors and friends would come over, and we'd have a big party, and he'd sing all night.
This is in Jacksonville, when he came down to Jacksonville.
Right,
Oh,
in
that
Jacksonville.
sounds wonderful.
And of course, we went to Savannah. It was always party time too.
Was this usually holidays?
No,
No?
not particularly holidays, just, during the year, summers or different times.
Mhm.
I think I remember maybe them coming for Christmas once. I can't remember if it was any more than that.
Mhm.
I remember their Christmas presents from California were always a big occasion, and they would usually come on Christmas Day, and they would be beautifully wrapped. And that was always, we'd like to be all finished with our Christmas, and here would come the postman delivering. In those days, they delivered on Christmas Day. I don't know if they do anymore.
I don't think so.
And they would just, be delivering these wonderful surprises from California. She had a service or something that she would take them to, and they would be beautifully wrapped.
What kinds of things would they be?
Oh, I remember one time I got a ermine cape and muff.
Ooh, I remember that.
I can't remember. That's the only present that really stands out in my mind.
The
That's
presentation of
probably
the-
every little girl's dream.
Yeah.
And I had that until I got married, and then I gave it to one of my husband's nieces. But I wore it all through, like to high school proms and things like that, which you don't have much use for that in Jacksonville, Florida. But
Probably not, but it wouldn't matter.
Right, it was just a little small cape.
Oh.
And I can't really remember, they'd be clothes and
Mhm.
jewelry and different things.
But very dramatic in the way they arrived. in
Yeah,
terms
to me,
of-
that's what I always remember, were these beautifully wrapped boxes, and they were usually late or arrived on Christmas Day.
Okay. Did the families ever vacation together or tour together or any combination of any of these people?
Yeah, I'm trying, see, I was the only child in the family for 7 years.
Mhm.
And so I spent a lot of time with Ginger and Johnny. And there's stories about when I was a baby, my father and Johnny fighting over who was going to push the carriage and things like that. My father and Johnny both were men that adored children, and all the children adored them.
Mhm.
They were a lot alike, Johnny and my father. They were born the same month, and both from the South, married these two girls from Brooklyn. And so they always got along very well. And when I was about 5, I'm not sure if it was 5 or when my brother was born, so it would have been 7. My grandmother and I went to California. I think it was at the 1939 World's Fair. I must have been 7. I went up there while my brother was, because my mother was having my brother, and she had to be in bed,
Mhm.
and because she was having problems. So I went up to stay with Nana and Claire, and then Nana and I took the boat. At that time, you could take a boat from New York down to, I think we went all the way to New Orleans on the boat. And then we took a train to California. I may have 2 trips mixed up, because I remember some things and some things I've been told. But I remember going out and staying with Ginger and Johnny for quite some time at that time.
And they didn't have kids. at
And
that
they
time.
didn't have kids. So that may be 2 separate trips, one when I was 5 and one when I was 7. Can't really remember for sure. And then when I was older, and we would go to New York a lot, and Johnny would always have house seats for us, and we would go to a Broadway show every day, and twice on Saturdays and Wednesdays when they had matinees.
How wonderful.
And we had the wonderful house seats. Now I go up there, and theater tickets cost, $100, and I sit in the balcony. It's quite a change.
But what a great experience to
But,
have.
yeah, and a couple of times when Johnny had show opening, and my grandmother went to California to take care of Jeff and Amanda. So Amanda is adopted, and she is the same age as my brother. And then Jeff is 7 years younger than Amanda, like my brother's 7 years younger than me. And so when I was, let's see, I'd had 1 year of college. It was just before I got married. I'm trying to remember what show would have been opening then, in 51.
Well, there was Saratoga, it was 50s.
Well, anyway, Donnie and Ginger went east for a show, and Nana and I went to California to take care of the children because Nana didn't drive. So they asked me to come to take, so that I could drive her around. And another time, after I was married and had one child, I went out and stayed with the kids while they came east, because they didn't like to just leave them. They usually had a full-time maid, but they didn't like to leave the children without family. So I went out and did that. And then a lot of times we'd meet them in New York, and I used to have a good time. I'd go up there, and maybe Nana and Claire and Johnny and I would go out to dinner, and then they'd go home, and Johnny'd take me out to all the nightclubs and things like that.
Do you remember where you went?
I remember one time we went to, what's his name? Banjo player. It had a place in the Village. Maybe I'll think of his name in a minute.
Well, there's Flat and Scruggs that did banjo.
No, this is, I can't think of his name. He had a nightclub down in the Village. And Johnny took me down there, and he said, now, I'm going to introduce you, and I'm going to tell them all you're my niece, but they're not going to believe it, and you just let them not believe it. I don't know where Ginger was. She must have still been in California, and he must have been in New York on business. But that was fun. So.
Yeah, we've heard that he liked to go to places in Greenwich Village and see
Yeah,
what was going on.
I could just picture this guy. One night we went over to his house, and he answered the door in his bathrobe and with a shower cap on his head, because he was bald and he put mayonnaise on his head because somebody told him it wouldn't grow hair.
And this was some friend of Johnny's and Ginger's.
It's a famous name. If I can think of it, sooner or later I'll tell you and you will know.
Okay.
But I just can't think of his name right now.
He may prefer that we not remember his name.
Well, he's dead.
Okay, well, that shouldn't bother anybody then.
But anyway, we spent a lot of time together, and it was always fun. And when I'd go out to California to visit, we'd go to, all the famous restaurants, and they'd take us to parties with them. And when I got married at 19 to my first husband. They had a big party for us with.
And this was where?
In L.A.
In Los Angeles.
They were living on DeLongpre then.
Okay.
And, my husband was a Navy pilot, and he was being transferred to Moffett Field, California, so we drove across country and stopped to visit them on the way up. And they threw this big party for us with, I remember, Audrey Hepburn and Mel Ferrar, and
really?
a lot of people like that there. Of course, a lot of their friends were not in the business or were not songwriters, but every little mix of everything, directors and songwriters, and the parties were always fun because there'd be somebody, some famous person sitting at the piano playing and singing songs, and they would go on till 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning.
Where were they living then? This would have been on DeLongpre?
On DeLongpre. Mm-hmm. They lived there. Johnny got very attached to things. And I once heard Margaret, when she was singing that song, I'm Old-Fashioned, that was the way, that was Johnny. He was old-fashioned, and he was loyal, and he was, he never put on airs. He was very unassuming, and they had actually a very modest little bungalow that they bought when they first moved to California on DeLongpre Avenue, which was a block off Sunset in a section that's not very nice anymore. And they added on and redid, and the house grew, and then all the neighbors started selling, and they started building apartments around there, and Johnny just refused to move. Finally, I think he was probably one of the last people, he was just absolutely forced to sell the house. Well, then he wanted the house. They said, okay, you know, we're gonna give you the money, you can buy the house back for $1 and move it. Well, I was visiting them on several occasions when they had found lots that they wanted to move the house to. And every time they found a lot they wanted to move the house to, it turned out they couldn't, because the house was a very old house, had been added on to, and the old parts didn't meet the building codes. And so they wound up, much to Johnny's dismay, just having to go and buy a whole new house. But he tried, I mean, he must have taken a year trying to find some way to get that house moved.
That's interesting. We hadn't heard that.
And
I knew that they were more or less forced out, that the area changed and the buildings were built.
And he was the same way with cars. When I went out there with Nana in the early 50s, he had this Cadillac convertible that at that time was about 10 years old. And his agent kept telling him, you know, this isn't good for your image, you know, you really need to get a new car. And he said, I like this car. And, you know, it didn't see any point in getting a new car just because the new ones had those fancy fins on them, and they were kind of stupid looking anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so he drove his old 10-year-old car. And then another thing about cars, I remember when the little tiny Ford, first little small Ford came out, Ford Pinto. He thought that was cute, so he bought one. And somebody gave him a car phone, which was, you know, they're not the little neat things they are now, they're pretty big. And he had this little Pinto he drove around with a car phone and this killer stereo system in it. I think the car phone, the stereo system probably cost more than the car. And then there was a Ford kind of pickup that came out that it was like a cab, and the back was cut down, kind of funny looking. I always thought it looked like a urinal.
It's okay.
He thought that was cute, so he bought one of those, went for their beach house. And he would pile all the neighborhood kids in the back of that and take them out for ice cream and to the beach and things like that.
It's when they lived at Newport Beach.
When they were down at Newport. They were down there when they had to move out of the house into Longpre and the other house wasn't ready yet, they took an apartment on, I think it was called La Cienega Boulevard. And they had the beach house down at Newport, and they would kind of go back and forth between the house in Newport and the house when they had to be in town, they had the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they got moved into the new house in Bel Air, then they got rid of the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
But they kept the house down in Newport for quite a while.
If I had a house in Newport, I'd keep it. I'm going to flip this over because we're going to get real short here in a minute. Okay, I think we're back again. You mentioned about Johnny's father dying.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about that?
I just remember, you know, Johnny wouldn't fly.
Right.
He was afraid to fly, but when his father died, he flew from California to Jacksonville, because probably there wasn't an airport in Savannah at that time. And then we picked him up and drove him to Savannah.
But when was this?
I really don't remember.
1940s?
Yeah, I guess it was in, let's see, I remember what house we were living in. Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
I think we had the date
Sometime-
somewhere, and
yeah,
it seems to me it was
sometime in the 40s. I think that was about one of the very, very few times Johnny ever got on an airplane.
Were you in Savannah for the funeral? Do you remember anything?
I don't
about it?
remember. I think my mother and father probably went up with him. I don't remember being there.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't have been old enough to.
I really don't remember. I
Really
remember trips to Savannah, and I remember his mother and being in their house on Gwinnett Place.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember being there for the funeral.
What can you tell me about his mother?
Oh dear. Well, she was nice. She was kind of fun. She always, had the Southern hospitality. She didn't cook. I think she knew how to cook one thing.
Oh, really?
I think she cooked leg of lamb or something. That was the only thing she knew how to cook. But in those days, help was cheap, and I guess she always had help. And that's just one of the stories I remember. And of course, Johnny was always very good to her. And I don't remember her too well until she got older, and I would see her and Juliana up in New York sometimes. When she got a little dotty, she would not remember things. But of course, Johnny was her baby and her pride and joy, and she always kind of babied him.
Yeah, we'd heard that.
Yeah. I imagine he and Juliana were, very spoiled and pampered
You
children.
think so? I've only met Juliana once, and that was after she was in the nursing home at Tybee, and that's not really a good time to find out anything about anybody. She helped us identify some photographs.
Well, she adored Johnny.
Did
she
she?
was very close. She and Johnny were very close. And her daughter Nancy and Johnny were very close.
I've been referred to Nancy as somebody that we should contact about this, because
Yeah.
photographs and faces and information that other people probably don't know she may is kind of what
Yeah, I
I've
think
been
I
told.
told you that.
You did, and
Mhm.
Mandy did, and somebody else did,
Yeah.
and we're going to, just.
Nancy, I
not
know
right
whenever
away.
I get together with Nancy, she tells me things I never knew about, the family and Johnny and everything. So she'd be a very good source.
I think I mentioned to you that we took these photographs down not knowing what any of them were really, and that when Juliana looked at them, she looked harder again, and then her face lit up and she said, "Bubba."
Right, that's what she
And
called him, Bubba.
We had never heard anybody refer to Johnny Mercer as
She
Bubba
always
before.
called him Bubba.
And now we know. And we said, "Okay, now by Bubba do you mean?" She said, "Well, of course I mean."
Right.
Did you see much of Mandy or Jeff?
Oh, yeah, always.
You would have been close enough in age to kind of be in the kids group at gatherings
Well,
and things.
I remember when Amanda was just a few years old, Ginger and Amanda came to visit us in Jacksonville and stayed there for a week or so. And Amanda and my brother Johnny were the same age. Maybe they were both about 3, and they fought all the time.
Oh, really? What? Which one fought?
Amanda and Johnny.
Okay.
My brother Johnny.
Okay.
He used to be little Johnny. Then he got to be bigger Johnny.
Right.
And then it got to be just older and younger Johnny. It was always kind of a problem. But he wasn't named after Johnny Mercer. My father was also named John.
Well, this gets complicated then.
Yes. So my father's name was John Edward Hall Jr., and my brother was the 3rd. And his son is the 4th. And his son has just had 3 daughters, so it ends there.
Well, he could. He could.
No,
It does happen.
I think his wife says that's it. So it ended there. But it was always kind of confusing when we talk about Johnny. But Amanda was just beautiful when she was a baby. I'm sure you've seen pictures of
pictures
her.
are
She
just
just had that, white hair and big blue eyes, and she was just looked like a little angel, but she wasn't. She was a little devil.
And remember, she may hear this someday.
That's okay. Right now, she's one of the sweetest people I've ever known. She really is a sweet, nice person, and she's just very much fun to be around with. She has a little giggle that I'm sure if you've been around her, you've heard her giggle. Call her on the telephone, and half the time she's giggling about something, and she's had that little giggle all her life.
But kind of a handful maybe when she was little.
Well, just
Creative,
well,
maybe.
I think she and Johnny were just each used to be in the center of attention. So maybe.
That happens too.
Yeah. And then Johnny went out and stayed with them one whole summer at Newport.
Oh, really?
And, we would do things like that. And, before they had children, they would, were very generous and everything with my brother and I.
Mhm.
So,
Let me see. In later years, say in the 70s, first half of the 70s, before Johnny became ill, were the
Mhm.
families still seeing each other a fair amount?
Oh,
or-
yeah, they were always,
Okay,
we
so
were always
it
very
continued.
close.
It continued consistently then,
Mhm.
pretty much through.
Mhm. My grandmother lived, on my father's side, lived in Jacksonville,
Mhm.
but way out in the country. And I think I saw more of my mother's family in New York and Ginger and Johnny, who lived in California, than I did of my grandmother.
Really?
As we all traveled a lot and saw each other. We'd go to California, they'd come to Savannah or Jacksonville, or we'd all meet in New York.
Mhm.
So we were always very close.
Were any of you around much at the time that Johnny became ill? I know you mentioned to me off tape that you evidently did see him sometime prior to the surgery.
Well, he had, they had been in London, and he had blacked out one day he was getting off a bus or something, and he just blacked out.
Mhm.
And the doctor, told him that when he got back to his home in California, that he should, go to the doctor, and he wouldn't go. He was the kind of person that a lot of men are, but some more extreme than others, that you couldn't get him to a doctor.
I'd heard that from somebody that
Yeah.
he just wouldn't unless he really, really couldn't avoid it.
Right. And I saw him in New York, and then we used to talk on the phone and correspond, and Ginger was very upset because he was getting worse and he wouldn't go to the doctor. And
What was happening? Was it more falling down? Or?
I think he was blacking out occasionally, and I don't know, his equilibrium was
Mhm.
off. And, I wrote him a long letter and said, we all love you and we're worried about you, and Ginger's so worried, please go and do this for her. And shortly after that, he went to the doctor and he had the surgery. Well, I guess he'd been to he went to the doctor, and then he didn't want to have surgery.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the surgery wasn't successful.
Mhm.
I guess he never really recovered after that. He was, had in a hospital bed and had full-time nurses and everything, and he never really recovered, and he didn't like people to come and visit him.
Mhm.
He was conscious and all, and he knew what his situation was, and he was embarrassed. He didn't want people to see him that way,
Mhm.
and so he didn't like us to come and visit or anything.
Did anybody? I mean, we know that very few people, that he was pretty isolated during
Yeah.
this time. But did any members of your family visit that you know of during this period?
I'm not sure. I think, seems to me like Mother was there, like maybe Mother and Daddy were out there, I don't remember. No, Daddy would have already been dead. I think Mother may have been out there. Mother and Ginger were very close, and I think Mother went to be with Ginger for a while.
Mhm.
Because I remember her telling me a lot of the things that I don't know firsthand.
Right.
So I think Mother must have gone and stayed with her for a while. When my father died, Ginger took Mother on a cruise.
Oh, when was that?
My father died in when did Kennedy die? 63 or 64? My father died.
John Kennedy?
Yeah.
63.
Okay, then my father died 6 months later,
Mhm.
in 64. I mark it from there because I was in the hospital and they told me my father had cancer. And that day I watched Kennedy's funeral on TV, so that's how I remember it. So that was in 64. And Ginger took Mother on a cruise to the Far East. And it was when the Olympics were in Japan, and they went to the Olympics and they toured all around out there. And then when Ginger was ill, or when Johnny died and all, Mother went and spent time with Ginger.
Mhm.
Um, I would say they were closer,
Mhm.
the closer of the two sisters.
And in the years after that, we know that Ginger traveled and made a new life for herself, new friends to a certain extent.
Yeah.
They were still close and still visiting and still
Oh, yeah.
doing things together.
And I saw a lot of Ginger then. Probably the last few years when, after I moved here to Atlanta, about the same year Johnny died.
Mhm.
And then Ginger was making trips back and forth to here.
Mhm.
And so I saw a lot of her and a lot of Mark. Mark had been corresponding with Johnny. He was someone they had known years ago.
Mhm.
And he had kept up correspondence with Johnny. And after Ginger died, he started corresponding with, after Johnny died, he started corresponding with Ginger.
Mhm.
And so that's how they became friends again after years of, not seeing each other.
At
And
least-
because Johnny wouldn't fly, they really hadn't done a lot of traveling.
Mhm.
They did take some cruises. They went to Europe a few times. They went on their honeymoon
Mhm.
to Scotland, which was Johnny's heritage.
Mhm.
And, a couple of times to Europe, mainly on business.
And they traveled by boat. Or at
They
least he
always
did,
traveled
'cause-
by boat.
Right.
Yes. When my grandmother was ill, they were in, must have been when they were either in Europe doing something with Michel Legrand or with Andre Previn when my grandmother was ill and Ginger flew over.
Mhm.
She was in Florida with my mother. Nana was in Florida with my mother and Ginger flew over. Johnny was very upset. He didn't want her flying across the ocean. But she did it against his wishes. So after Johnny died, she did do more traveling
Mhm.
and did quite a lot of traveling. You mentioned the ballooning, which I'm sure you would never have gotten Johnny up in a balloon.
Well, if he didn't like airplanes,
He
he
sure-
might not like a balloon either.
He sure wouldn't get up in a balloon, so Ginger did, and she served on, the boards of ACAC and
Mhm.
ASCAP,
ASCAP.
and so she, stayed involved. And
She had a very active life.
yes, she always had a very busy life.
Mhm. I think that's pretty much all the questions that I had. Are there any final thoughts or things that we missed that you think
Well,
should
I had told you,
capture?
I had told you, or Chris, I guess, about a story one time that I thought was so cute about Johnny that she said she'd like me to record one day, so maybe you'd like me to tell you
Please.
about that. I thought it was, of course, so I'm not very good at storytelling, so it's gonna lose a lot, but I thought it was very typical, the way Johnny was. Jeff always had animals, and when they came to Savannah, he would go back with alligators and turtles, and they
Living.
had living things, and so they had this sort of huge aquarium in the backyard down at Lido Isle, the beach. And Jeff decided he didn't want them anymore. So they gave the alligators to a pet shop there, because they had grown quite large.
Mhm.
They were 3 or 4 feet long. And they had this turtle that they had picked up when they were in Savannah one day, and on the road out to the house on the river. And so Jeff was just gonna let the turtle go, and Johnny said, no, that's not right, this is a Georgia turtle, and he's not fit, he's not gonna do well in California. So they went to the pet shop, and they had a special little carrying thing all made up for him so that he could travel on the plane. And they called a friend, Savannah, and told them exactly the spot where they had found him, on the road to the house, and instructed the friend to meet him at the plane to take the turtle and deliver him and put him right in this spot where they had picked him up. And then Johnny went into this little story about, you know, can't you just imagine when that turtle gets back to Savannah, another little turtle say, well, where have you been, man? We haven't seen you for a long time. And this little turtle says, well, I've been in Hollywood. And then Johnny went into this, you know, long story about what the turtle is going to tell them about Hollywood. But I just thought that was a cute story, and typical of the thing that he would go to all that trouble to put that turtle back in Savannah, where they found it, not just let it go or let it die or whatever.
That's cute.
He was very soft-hearted, and you know, he wouldn't kill a fly and anything like that. The reason they got rid of the things was Jeff was going to, he caught Jeff feeding one of his frogs to one of the alligators. And he says, what are you doing? And Jeff says, that's life, Dad. That's the way the world, you know, that's the way things are. And Johnny says, not in my backyard, it's not. And that's when he gave the alligators away.
Well, I'm sure the alligators really did enjoy the frogs, so, but if you don't want that going on, then you just kind of have to take care of it.
Right. So
Any other thoughts?
That's
Anything else?
all.
I
I
know
can't
that there's
think of
lots and
anything
lots
else.
that we didn't talk about, but great. Well, I thank you very much.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I hope I've been of some help.
Absolutely, absolutely. We appreciate it.